Hello, welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving into the dark, twisted world of Stranger Things and all the nightmare fuel that crawls out of the Upside Down. I'll be covering all the monsters I can fit in for tonight, but there's definitely more to come. So we'll start with the dimension itself, how it came to be, and what makes it so terrifying. Then we'll move on to the creatures season by season, from the Demogorgon to Vecna, as well as all the smaller horrors in between. Plenty to get talking about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, grab your Eggo waffles and flashlight, get comfortable in the basement, and let's begin. So way before the Demogorgon started hunting kids in Hawkins, way before anyone knew what the Upside Down even was, this dark, alternate dimension was just sitting there, waiting. And honestly, the more you learn about it, the more unsettling it becomes. The Upside Down is an alternate dimension that exists in parallel to our world. It mirrors Hawkins, Indiana almost exactly, with the same buildings, the same streets, the same locations. But it's like looking at a photograph that's been left to decay for decades. Everything is darker, colder, and covered in this weird biological growth that looks like vines mixed with something you'd find growing on forgotten food in the back of a fridge. There is no exact founding date for the Upside Down itself, at least not one we know about. But based on what we learn throughout the series, particularly in Season 4, the dimension has existed for a very long time. It wasn't created in 1983. That's when it became connected to our world. But the dimension itself, that was already there. November 6th, 1983. That's the date everything changed. That's when 11, a young girl with powerful psychic abilities, was being used by Hawkins National Laboratory for experiments. Dr. Martin Brenner, the scientist running the program, had 11 use her powers for remote viewing, basically projecting her consciousness into a dark void where she could spy on people from a distance. During one of these sessions, she made contact with a creature, the Demogorgon, though she didn't know that's what it was called at the time. The contact was violent and terrifying, and in her panic, 11 accidentally tore open a rift between dimensions. A gate, the first gate actually, though it wouldn't be the last. This gate connected Hawkins' lab directly to the Upside Down, and suddenly creatures that had been safely trapped in another dimension could cross over into ours. Now here's where it gets really interesting. In Season 4, Nancy Wheeler and some of the others end up trapped in the Upside Down for a bit. And Nancy notices something weird. Well, weirder than usual. The Upside Down version of Hawkins is stuck in 1983. Specifically, it's frozen on November 6th, 1983. The exact day 11 opened that first gate. Nancy's house in the Upside Down still has her old posters on the wall, the ones she'd taken down years ago in the real world. Everything is preserved exactly as it was on that specific day. It's like the Upside Down took a snapshot of Hawkins at the moment the gate opened and just stopped updating. The implication is pretty wild when you think about it. The Upside Down wasn't always a mirror of Hawkins. Before that gate opened, it was something else entirely. According to Vecna, who we'll talk about properly later, the Upside Down was originally just this vast, empty dimension. No structure, no recognizable locations, just a dark, primordial space with particles floating around and some native creatures wandering about. When 11 opened that gate, it seems like she bound the two dimensions together. The Upside Down absorbed Hawkins, or at least an echo of it, creating this twisted, decayed copy that's been stuck in time ever since. But what actually is this place, physically speaking? It's cold, really cold. The air is thick and hard to breathe, though it's gotten slightly better over the seasons, probably as the dimensions have moved closer together. There are spores floating everywhere, these ash-like particles that drift through the air constantly. They're not just for atmosphere either. These particles are actually connected to the hive mind that controls most of the creatures in the Upside Down. Everything is covered in vines, these thick, ropey tendrils that grow over every surface like some kind of alien nervous system. And that's basically what they are. The vines are sentient, or at least connected to the central intelligence of the Upside Down. They can move, they can strangle, and if you disturb one, you risk alerting everything else in the dimension. The sky, if you can call it that, is dark and stormy, with red lightning occasionally crackling through the clouds. There's no sun, no natural light. The only illumination comes from this eerie red glow that seems to permeate everything. It's essentially a hostile environment for humans. You can survive there for a while, as Will Byers proved in Season 1 when he spent a week hiding in the upside-down version of Castle Byers. But it's not pleasant. The air makes you sick. The cold is relentless, and there's always the risk of running into something that wants to kill you. The gates between dimensions are fascinating in their own right. The first gate, the 111 created in Hawkins' lab, stayed open for quite a while. It was this massive, pulsating tear in reality, covered in what looks like organic tissue. You could physically walk through it, though that was deeply inadvisable, unless you had a really good reason. Gates can be opened in different ways. 11 psychic contacts with the Demogorgon opened the first one. Later, we'd learn that powerful psychic energy in general can tear rifts between dimensions. Vecna, using his victims' deaths as a kind of psychic battery, creates new gates with each person he kills. 4 gates arranged in a specific pattern, forming a massive rupture that threatens to merge the dimensions entirely. What's really interesting is how the 2 dimensions stay connected even when gates are closed. There's this persistent link, this bleed-through effect. When someone moves around in the Upside Down, lights flicker in the corresponding location in the real world. Joyce Byers figured this out in Season 1 when she realised Will was trying to communicate through the Christmas lights in her house. The connection works both ways too. Sounds can travel between dimensions under certain circumstances. Music, voices, even the ticking of a clock can echo across the barrier. This becomes super important in Season 4, when music turns out to be one of the few things that can break Vecna's hold on his victims. There's also this whole thing with psychic energy and emotional connections. The Upside Down seems to respond to strong emotions, particularly fear and trauma. It's almost like the dimension feeds on negative energy, or at least that's how Vecna uses it. The more suffering he causes, the stronger the connection becomes between the 2 worlds. Before looking into all this properly, I honestly hadn't realised how much thought went into the mechanics of the Upside Down. It's not just a spooky alternate dimension. It's got rules, patterns, and a kind of internal logic that makes it feel more real, even though it's completely fictional. One more thing worth mentioning is that we've only ever seen the upside-down version of Hawkins. Theoretically, the entire world could have an upside-down equivalent. There's no reason to think it's limited to just this one small town in Indiana. It's just that Hawkins is where the gate opened. So that's where the dimensions are most closely connected. The Russians figured this out too, apparently. In Season 3, we learned they'd been trying to open their own gate to the Upside Down from a secret facility beneath the Starcourt Mall. They knew about what happened at Hawkins' lab and wanted to harness the dimension's power for themselves. It didn't go well for them, but it does confirm that multiple gates can theoretically be opened in different locations. So yeah, the Upside Down. It's dark, it's cold, it's covered in biological nightmare fuel, and it's been stuck in 1983 since the day 11 accidentally connected it to our world. It's the source of every monster, every threat, every horrible thing that's happened in Hawkins over the course of the series. But to really understand the Upside Down, you need to understand the creatures that call it home. And there's one that started it all, the monster that kicked off this entire nightmare and set everything else in motion. Let's start with the Demogorgon, the monster that started it all and honestly set the tone for everything that came after. The Demogorgon is this tall, vaguely humanoid creature that's probably one of the most recognizable monsters in modern television. It stands upright, walks on two legs, and has these long skeletal arms ending in clawed hands that can tear through pretty much anything. But the really distinctive feature, the thing that makes it absolutely nightmare-inducing, is its head. Or rather, what passes for a head. Instead of a face, the Demogorgon has this flower-like opening that splits apart into 5 fleshy petals. When it opens up, you see rows and rows of sharp teeth arranged in concentric circles, like some kind of organic bear trap. It's got no eyes, no nose, nothing that looks remotely human. Just teeth and this gaping maw that screams like something out of your worst fever dream. The name Demogorgon comes from Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop game the kids in Hawkins play. In D&D, the Demogorgon is a demon prince, one of the most powerful and terrifying creatures in the game's mythology. When the boys needed to explain to people what they were dealing with, they used the closest reference they had. It's a pattern that continues throughout the series, actually, with loads of the monsters getting their names from the game. Now, the Demogorgon isn't just scary to look at, it's incredibly dangerous. It's got superhuman strength, easily capable of breaking down doors, flipping cars, and overpowering multiple adults at once. Its body seems to be naturally resistant to bullets, or at least partially resistant. We see people shoot at it throughout Season 1, and while it definitely doesn't enjoy being shot, the bullets don't seem to do much lasting damage. It's not invincible, but conventional weapons are pretty ineffective. What makes the Demogorgon particularly terrifying as a predator is its sense of smell. It can track blood from ridiculous distances like a shark in water, but somehow worse because it can do this across dimensions. When Nancy cuts her hand in the woods, the Demogorgon picks up on it almost immediately, even though it's in the upside down at the time. That's the kind of hunting ability that makes it basically impossible to hide from if you're injured. The creature can also create temporary rifts between dimensions, not permanent gates like 11 opened, but these short-lived portals that let it pass between the upside down and our world. It seems to do this instinctively, targeting areas where the barrier between dimensions is already weak. That's how it gets around Hawkins so effectively in Season 1, popping up in unexpected places and dragging people back to the upside down. One of the Demogorgon's signature calling cards is what it does to lights. When it's nearby, lights flicker and electronics go haywire. This happens consistently throughout the first season. Joyce Byers' Christmas lights, the lamps in the Wheeler house, the lights at Hawkins' lab. It's like the creature's presence disrupts electrical systems just by being close to them. This became one of the main ways characters knew they were in danger, even before they could see the monster itself. The Demogorgon's role in Season 1 is pretty straightforward. It's a predator, and it's hunting. Will Byers gets taken first, dragged into the upside down, on his way home from a D&D session at Mike's house. The creature kept him alive for a week, though we never get a full explanation of why. Maybe it was saving him for later, or maybe there's some other reason the Mind Flayer wanted him alive. Either way, Will survives, which is more than can be said for some of the Demogorgon's other victims. Barb Holland wasn't so lucky. She gets taken from the Wheeler's pool the same night Will disappears. And unlike Will, she doesn't make it. The Demogorgon kills her pretty quickly, and her body ends up in the upside down. It's one of the show's darker moments, and honestly, Barb deserved so much better. The Demogorgon stalks the main characters throughout the season, attacking at the Byers' house, at the middle school, and finally at Hawkins' lab itself. Each encounter is terrifying because the creature is so relentless. It doesn't give up, it doesn't get tired, and it seems to have an endless capacity for violence. Defeating it takes Eleven's powers at full strength. In the season finale, she confronts the Demogorgon at the middle school and basically disintegrates it using her telekinetic abilities. The effort is so intense that she vanishes as well, though we later learn she survived and ended up in the upside down herself for a while. What we learn later, particularly in Season 2 and beyond is that the Demogorgon isn't unique. It's not the Demogorgon, it's a Demogorgon. There are multiple ones, and they're all part of the hive mind controlled by the Mind Flayer. The one from Season 1 was basically a drone, a worker bee carrying out the will of something much larger and more intelligent. The creature does have weaknesses. Like pretty much everything from the Upside Down, it's vulnerable to extreme heat and fire. This makes sense given that the Upside Down itself is freezing cold. Heat disrupts their biology somehow, causes them pain, and can kill them if the temperature is high enough. The characters figure this out gradually and start using fire as a weapon against the various creatures they encounter. Fun fact, the Demogorgon's design was inspired by real-world creatures. The VFX team looked at things like sharks with their multiple rows of teeth and Venus flytraps with their opening and closing mechanisms. They wanted something that felt organic and predatory, but also completely alien. I think they succeeded because the thing is properly terrifying. The Demogorgon established basically all the rules for how these creatures work. The flickering lights, the dimensional travel, the connection to blood, the hive mind, the vulnerability to fire. Everything that comes after builds on what the first season set up with this monster. It's the original Stranger Things nightmare, and even though we've seen scarier things since, there's something about that first encounter that still holds up. Which brings us to Dart, or D'Artagnan if you want to be proper about it, and the absolutely terrifying reveal of what baby Demogorgons actually are. Dart is discovered by Dustin Henderson in Season 2 while he's out trick-or-treating. The kid finds this little slug-like creature in his trash can, and being Dustin, immediately decides to keep it as a pet. He names it D'Artagnan after one of the Three Musketeers, calls it Dart for short, and sets it up in a terrarium in his room like it's a slightly unusual lizard. At first, Dart seems harmless. It's small, maybe the size of a slug or a pollywog, which is what Dustin initially thinks it is. Just some weird amphibian that wandered out of the woods. He even brings it to school to show Mr. Clark, their science teacher, who's equally baffled but intrigued. The problems start pretty quickly. Dart grows. Fast. Like, unnaturally fast. Within a day or two, it's doubled in size. Then it sheds its skin, revealing that it's not a pollywog at all. It's got more legs than it should, its body is developing in weird ways, and most concerning of all, it's developing a taste for meat. Specifically, it eats Muse, Dustin's cat. Poor Muse. Dustin comes home to find his terrarium empty and his cat missing, and after a bit of panicked searching, he discovers that Dart has grown large enough to consume an entire cat and is now hiding in his house somewhere. This is when Dustin realizes he's made a terrible mistake. By the time he manages to trap Dart in his storm cellar, the creature has molted again and grown even larger. It's now the size of a medium dog, with 4 legs, a long tail, and that distinctive petal-shaped head that immediately identifies it as being related to the Demogorgon. Dustin's pet isn't a pollywog, it's a baby Demogorgon, and it's going through its growth stages at an alarming rate. The kids end up calling these juvenile Demogorgons Demodogs because, well, they look like dogs crossed with Demogorgons. It's a simple name, but it works. Demodogs are quadrupedal, meaning they run on all fours like actual dogs. This makes them faster and more agile than the full-grown Demogorgon from Season 1, which walked upright. They're smaller too, maybe 3 or 4 feet long, but they make up for their size by hunting in packs. And when I say packs, I mean dozens of them at once. The full horror of what Demodogs can do becomes apparent during the attack on Hawkins' lab. The creatures swarm through the facility in a coordinated assault, overwhelming security and killing loads of people. The scene where they flood through the corridors is genuinely one of the most intense sequences in the series. They're fast, vicious, and there's just so many of them. Bob Newby, Joyce's sweet boyfriend, who just wanted to help, gets caught in the attack. He manages to restore power to the building and reset the security systems, giving everyone else a chance to escape. But on his way back to the others, the Demodogs catch him. It's a brutal death, and honestly, one of the saddest moments in the show. Bob was just a good guy trying to do the right thing. What's interesting about demodogs is that they're clearly a different life stage of the same species. They're not a separate creature. They're what demogorgons look like when they're younger. This implies that the creatures have a life cycle, that they grow and develop over time, rather than just appearing fully formed. The really heartbreaking bit comes near the end of season 2. Dustin is in the upside-down tunnels with Steve when they encounter Dart again. The creature has grown even more. It's nearly full size now, and it's with a pack of other demodogs. Dustin should be dead, but Dart recognizes him. Dustin tries something desperate. He pulls out a Three Musketeers bar, Dart's favourite candy from when it was small, and starts talking to it like he used to. And incredibly, it works. Dart stops, lets Dustin and Steve pass, and doesn't attack. It remembers being cared for, remembers the bond they had, even if it's now a monster under the Mind Flayer's control. It's actually pretty tragic when you think about it. For just a moment, something else breaks through the hive-mind connection. Not much, but enough. That scene proved these creatures aren't completely mindless. There's something in there, some capacity for memory or recognition, but ultimately, they're still weapons in someone else's war. Now let's talk about the Mind Flayer, also known as the Shadow Monster, and honestly, one of the most nightmare-inducing things the show has given us. The Mind Flayer first appears in Season 2, though not in a way anyone expects. Will Byers, freshly returned from his week in the Upside Down, starts having these visions. He calls them episodes, moments where he's suddenly back in the Upside Down, even though he's physically still in Hawkins. During these visions, he sees something in the sky, something massive. It looks like a giant spider made of shadows and storm clouds, towering over everything, with legs that stretch across the horizon. The thing is absolutely enormous, easily the size of a skyscraper, possibly bigger. It's hard to get a sense of scale when you're looking at something that exists in another dimension, but the implication is clear. This creature is way beyond anything they've dealt with before. The name Mind Flayer comes from, you guessed it, Dungeons and Dragons. In the game, Mind Flayers are these tentacled creatures that can control and enslave other beings through psychic powers. They're also called illithids, and they're some of the most feared monsters in D&D lore because of their ability to dominate minds and consume intelligence. When Dustin explains what they're dealing with to the group, he uses the closest analogue he can find, and the name sticks. What makes the Mind Flayer particularly terrifying is that it's not just a monster. It's the monster. It's the intelligence behind everything. The central nervous system of the Upside Down's hive mind. Every demogorgon, every demodog, every vine and particle in that dimension is connected to it and under its control. The Mind Flayer operates through possession. It sends these particles, the same spores that float around in the Upside Down, into people's bodies. Once enough of them accumulate, the Mind Flayer can take control, essentially using the person as a puppet. Will gets infected this way during his time in the Upside Down, and throughout Season 2, he's fighting this internal battle between his own consciousness and the Mind Flayer's influence. The possession progresses in stages. At first, Will just has the visions, these glimpses into the Upside Down. Then he starts feeling cold all the time because the Mind Flayer prefers freezing temperatures. Eventually, the Mind Flayer gains enough control to see through Will's eyes, to experience the real world through him, and gather intelligence about Hawkins and the people trying to stop it. There's this really unsettling moment where Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy realize Will isn't entirely himself anymore. They conduct what's basically an interrogation, asking him questions to figure out how much the Mind Flayer knows. And the creepiest bit is when Will's face goes completely blank, and this other intelligence looks out through his eyes. It's not Will anymore. It's something ancient and furious looking at them through a child's face. They eventually manage to exorcise the Mind Flayer from Will's body using heat. They crank up the temperature in the buyer's house as high as it'll go and basically cook the particles out of him. It's painful and traumatic, but it works. The Mind Flayer's connection to Will is severed, at least temporarily. Season 2 ends with 11 closing the gate at Hawkins' lab, cutting off the Mind Flayer's main access point to the real world. But here's the thing. A piece of it was already on our side when the gate closed. A fragment of the Mind Flayer got trapped in Hawkins, separated from the main entity in the Upside Down. That fragment becomes the primary threat in Season 3. Unable to return to its home dimension, the trapped piece of the Mind Flayer starts building itself a new body using biological material from our world. It possesses rats first, loads of them, making them consume chemicals and fertilizer to prepare them for the transformation. Then it moves on to people. Billy Hargrove becomes the Mind Flayer's primary host in Season 3. He gets dragged into the Upside Down, briefly, possessed, and then sent back out as the Mind Flayer's general in the real world. His job is to find more hosts, more bodies, to add to the Mind Flayer's growing army of what the characters call the Flayed. The Flayed are people who've been possessed and repurposed. They act normal most of the time, going about their daily lives so no one suspects anything. But when the Mind Flayer calls, they respond. They gather in secret, they follow instructions, and eventually they're consumed entirely. This is where Season 3 gets really disturbing. The Mind Flayer melts down the bodies of the Flayed, turning them into this grotesque biological slurry. Then it absorbs that biomass, using it to construct a physical form for itself. We're talking about loads of people, plus all those rats, just liquefied and merged together into one massive creature. The resulting monster is this spider-like thing made of melted flesh and bone, easily 2 or 3 stories tall. It's got multiple legs, a body that keeps absorbing more mass as it kills more victims, and it's completely under the Mind Flayer's control. The characters encounter it at the Brimborn Steel Works and later at Starcourt Mall, and both times it's absolutely terrifying. Nancy and Jonathan face off against a smaller version, basically a scout made from fewer bodies, at the hospital. It's this shape-shifting mass of flesh that can squeeze through doorways and reform itself after being damaged. 11 eventually destroys it, but not before it demonstrates just how creative and horrifying the Mind Flayer can be with biological material. The final battle at Starcourt Mall is where everything comes together. The massive flesh monster attacks while the heroes try to close the Russian gate underneath the mall. Billy, still possessed but fighting the Mind Flayer's control, makes a final stand. He blocks the creature from reaching 11 and her friends, and the Mind Flayer, furious at this betrayal, kills him. It's one of the most emotional deaths in the series. Billy was a complicated character, kind of a bully for most of his time on the show, but in his last moments, he breaks free just enough to do something heroic. When the Russian gate closes, severing the Mind Flayer's connection to the Upside Down completely, the flesh monster falls apart. Without that link to sustain it, the whole thing just collapses into a puddle of goo. But Season 4 reveals something that changes everything we thought we knew about the Mind Flayer. Because behind the Mind Flayer was Vecna, and the reveal of who he really is might be one of the darkest twists Stranger Things has ever pulled. Vecna is the main villain of Season 4, but his story starts way back in the 1950s, decades before any of the main characters were born. His real name is Henry Creel, and he was just a kid when his family moved to Hawkins. The Creels bought this big house on the edge of town, a place that would eventually become known as the Creel House, one of the most haunted locations in Hawkins history. Victor Creel, Henry's father, thought moving to a small town would be good for the family. He was a veteran, trying to build a quiet life for his wife, Virginia, and their 2 children, Henry and Alice. But Henry wasn't a normal kid. He had psychic powers from a very young age, telekinesis, telepathy, the ability to reach into people's minds and see their darkest thoughts. He didn't ask for these abilities, but he had them, and they gave him a pretty grim view of humanity. He could see through the facades people put up, see all the ugliness and hypocrisy underneath, and it made him angry. Henry started experimenting with his powers on animals first, torturing and killing them to understand what he was capable of. Then he turned his attention to his family. He tormented them with visions and telekinetic attacks, making them think the house was haunted or cursed. His mother, Virginia, started to suspect something was wrong with Henry specifically, that he was the source of the disturbances. In 1959, Henry killed his mother and sister. He used his powers to lift them into the air, break their bones, and crush their eyes into their skulls. It's the same method he'd used decades later as Vecna. Victor survived only because Henry wanted him to, wanted someone to be blamed for the murders. Victor ended up in a psychiatric hospital, convicted of crimes he didn't commit, while Henry disappeared into the system. This is where Dr. Martin Brenner enters the picture. Brenner was a government scientist researching psychic phenomena, and he somehow found out about Henry. He brought the boy to Hawkins National Laboratory and made him the first test subject in what would eventually become a program to create psychic soldiers. Henry became known as One, the template for all the numbered children that would come after. For years, Henry worked at the lab. Brenner kept him controlled through a device implanted in his neck, basically a shock collar that prevented him from using his full powers. Henry was forced to help train the other children, kids who'd been given abilities through Brenner's experiments. He resented this, hated Brenner for treating him like a lab rat, but he played along and waited for his opportunity. That opportunity came in 1979 when he befriended a young girl named 11. 11 was one of the most powerful subjects in the program, maybe even more powerful than Henry himself. He manipulated her into removing his control device, convinced her that Brenner was the real villain and that they needed to escape together. The moment the device came off, Henry's powers returned at full strength. What followed was a massacre. Henry killed everyone in the lab, every scientist, every guard, every test subject except 11. He slaughtered them systematically, using his powers to break their bodies and crush their minds. The walls were covered in blood, bodies were strewn everywhere, and Henry revelled in it. He tried to convince 11 to join him, to use their powers to reshape the world into something better. 11 refused. In the confrontation that followed, 11 accessed a level of power she'd never reached before. She fought back against Henry with everything she had, and in a final desperate move, she didn't just knock him out or kill him. She tore open a rift between dimensions and hurled him through it, banishing him to the Upside Down. The government covered up the massacre, blamed it on a gas leak or some other accident, and 11's memory of the event was so traumatic that she repressed it completely. For years, she didn't remember that she'd been the one to send Henry to the Upside Down. She didn't remember being responsible for everything that came after, because Henry didn't die in the Upside Down. He transformed. The trip through dimensions essentially burned him alive. His body was twisted and scarred. His skin became this mottled grey-brown texture, and vines from the Upside Down started growing into and out of his flesh, connecting him directly to the dimension itself. He wasn't human anymore, not really. He'd become something else, something monstrous. According to Henry's own account, the Upside Down was chaotic when he arrived. There were creatures, the native fauna of the dimension, but no real structure or intelligence guiding them. Then he found the Mind Flayer, or rather, what would become the Mind Flayer. It was just this cloud of particles, this swirling mass of shadow with no form or purpose. Henry shaped it. Using his powers, he moulded the particle cloud into the spider-like entity we see in seasons 2 and 3. The Mind Flayer isn't the puppet master. Vecna is. He's been controlling it this entire time, using it as a tool to enact his revenge on the world that rejected him, and specifically on 11 for banishing him. This completely recontextualizes everything from the previous seasons. The Demogorgon that took Will, the Mind Flayer's possession of Will and Billy, the flesh monster. All of it traces back to Henry Creel's desire for vengeance. In Season 4, Vecna uses a new method to attack Hawkins. He targets teenagers who are dealing with trauma, guilt, and depression. Chrissy Cunningham, the cheerleader struggling with an eating disorder and an abusive mother. Fred Benson, a student reporter racked with guilt over a car accident. Patrick McKinney, a basketball player being abused at home. And Max Mayfield, still grieving her stepbrother Billy's death and consumed by guilt over feeling relieved he was gone. Vecna reaches into their minds, shows them their worst memories and fears, and feeds on their suffering. When he's drained them enough, he kills them. The method is always the same. Their bodies lift into the air, their bones break, their eyes collapse, and a new gate to the upside down opens at the sight of their death. The kids eventually figure out that music can break Vecna's hold. A person's favourite song, something with deep emotional resonance, can anchor them to reality and pull them out of Vecna's mental trap. This leads to one of the most iconic scenes in the series. Max listening to Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill on her Walkman, running through Vecna's mindscape while her friends play the song at full volume in the real world. Max survives her first encounter with Vecna, but barely. She's marked now, and Vecna isn't done with her. Physically, Vecna is horrifying to look at. He's humanoid but twisted, with vines growing through his body, and his left hand transformed into this clawed, tentacled thing. His face is scarred and burned, barely recognisable as human. Jamie Campbell Bower, the actor who plays him, spent hours in the makeup chair to achieve the look, and the result is genuinely unsettling. Vecna's powers are extensive. He has telekinesis strong enough to snap bones and crush buildings. He can create detailed mental illusions, trapping people in nightmares based on their own memories. He can possess and control creatures from the upside down. And every time he kills someone, he creates another gate, working toward his ultimate goal of merging the two dimensions completely. The Season 4 finale sees the Hawkins crew split into multiple groups for a coordinated attack. Some stay in the real world to protect Max, who's volunteered to be bait. Others enter the Upside Down to attack Vecna directly in the Creel house. Nancy, Steve and Robin hit him with Molotov cocktails and shotgun blasts, while Eleven fights him psychically from Nevada. Max does get killed technically. Vecna breaks her arms and legs, crushes her eyes and uses her death to open the fourth and final gate. But Eleven, using her powers remotely, manages to restart Max's heart. Max survives, but she's in a coma, her mind trapped somewhere beyond reach. Vecna himself is wounded, but definitely not dead. The coordinated attack hurt him, set him back, but he's still in the Upside Down, still connected to his network of vines and gates. And the 4 gates he created have merged into one massive rift that's tearing Hawkins apart. Season 5 is going to be about finishing what they started, because Vecna's not the type to give up. Speaking of Vecna's army, Season 4 introduced us to yet another variant of demo creatures, and these ones could fly. Demobats are exactly what they sound like, bat-like creatures from the Upside Down, with the same general aesthetic as their Demogorgon cousins. They've got leathery wings, no eyes, and that signature petal mouth full of sharp teeth. They're smaller than demodogs, maybe the size of a large bird, but they make up for it by swarming in massive numbers. Their tails are particularly nasty, long, muscular, and strong enough to wrap around someone's neck and strangle them. They use this in combination with their teeth, attacking from multiple angles at once. One bat goes for your throat with its tail, while another bites your arms, and a third goes for your legs. It's coordinated, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. Steve Harrington learns this the hard way when he gets pulled into the Upside Down through the lake gate. The Demobats swarm him immediately, and it takes Nancy, Robin, and Eddie all working together to pull them off. One of the bats wraps its tail around Steve's neck and nearly strangles him before he manages to bite its head off, in what Eddie accurately describes as a very Ozzy Osbourne move. The Demobats serve as Vecna scouts and aerial surveillance. They fly around the Upside Down in massive flocks, patrolling for intruders and reporting back to their master. When the kids enter the Upside Down to attack Vecna, the bats are the first line of defense, swarming anyone who gets too close to the Creel house. Eddie Munson's death involves the Demobats. In one of the series' most heartbreaking moments, Eddie stays behind to distract the swarm, playing Metallica's Master of Puppets on his guitar at full volume to draw them away from the Creel house. The plan works. The bats swarm him, and Eddie makes a stand, fighting them off as long as he can. But there's just too many. He's overwhelmed, and by the time Dustin reaches him, it's too late. Eddie's sacrifice bought the others time to attack Vecna, but the cost was brutal. The Demobats can be lured and distracted by loud noises, which is how Eddie's guitar trick works. They're also vulnerable to fire and physical damage, though killing one when there's hundreds of them around you is pretty much impossible. Your best bet is to avoid them entirely or find shelter before they swarm. Then there are the vines. The vines have been present since Season 1, covering pretty much every surface in the Upside Down. They look like thick, ropey tendrils, somewhere between plant roots and something more organic, more alive. They're dark, slimy, and they pulse with this unsettling rhythm, like they're breathing or circulating blood. These aren't just scenery. The vines are sentient, or at least responsive. They're part of the Upside Down's nervous system, connected to the hive mind that Vecna controls. Touch one vine, and you risk alerting the entire network to your presence. Will Byers was one of the first victims of the vines. In Season 1, when Joyce and Hopper find him in the Upside Down, he's strapped to a wall, covered in these tendrils that have grown into his mouth and throat. It's like the Upside Down was trying to absorb him, keep him alive but trapped, feeding off him slowly. Hopper has his own encounter with the vines in Season 2. He's exploring the tunnel system beneath Hawkins, these passages that connect to the Upside Down, and the vines are everywhere down there. They wrap around his arms and legs, trying to pull him deeper into the tunnels. He only escapes by burning them, using a lighter to scare them off long enough to break free. The vines respond to disturbance across the entire network. Burn one section of vine in the tunnels under Hawkins, and the vines in the Upside Down react. The creatures connected to the hive mind react. It's all one organism, spread across multiple dimensions. Season 4 shows Vecna using the vines more actively, as weapons. When Nancy, Steve and Robin are in the Upside Down version of the Creel house, the vines burst through the floor and wrap around them, dragging them down and holding them in place. The vines grow into their skin, trying to immobilize them completely while Vecna deals with other threats. Max faces something similar. In one of her visions, Vecna's lair is covered in vines, and they wrap around her arms and legs, holding her in place while Vecna approaches. It's psychological as much as physical, using her fear of being trapped and helpless against her. The vines have one major weakness: heat. Fire makes them recoil, causes them pain, and can kill them if the temperature gets high enough. This is consistent with basically everything from the Upside Down. The dimension is cold, so its inhabitants are vulnerable to extreme heat. There are other creatures and elements in the Upside Down too, though we see less of them. The spores that float through the air constantly, the ash-like particles that make it hard to breathe, the weird biological membranes that cover windows and doorways, the strange fungi and growths that seem to be slowly consuming everything. It's an entire ecosystem, really. A hostile, alien environment where everything is connected and working toward the same goal, breaking through to our world and consuming it. The Upside Down doesn't just have monsters in it. The Upside Down is the monster. The vines are its nervous system, the spores are its blood, the creatures are its immune system responding to infection, and Vecna is the brain controlling all of it. What makes these supporting elements so effective is that they're everywhere. You can fight a demogorgon, run from demodogs, even face down Vecna himself. But the vines are in every room, the spores are in every breath, the bats could swarm from any direction. There's no safe place in the upside down, just different levels of danger. Because sometimes the monsters don't look like monsters at all. Sometimes they look like your friend, your neighbour, or that lifeguard at the community pool. The flayed are people who've been possessed by the mind flayer, turned into extensions of its will, while still maintaining their human appearance. It's one of the most disturbing concepts the show has explored, because unlike a demogorgon that you can see coming, the flayed look completely normal until it's too late. Season 3 is when we really see the mind flayer use this tactic extensively. Remember, a piece of it got trapped in Hawkins when 11 closed the gate at the end of Season 2. Cut off from the main entity in the Upside Down, it needed a new approach. So it started possessing people, using them as host bodies to gather resources and build itself something more substantial. The process starts with the mind flayer's particles entering a person's body. This can happen through direct contact with infected material or through one of the flayed forcibly introducing the particles into a new victim. Once inside, the particles multiply and spread through the person's system, gradually taking control of their mind and body. Billy Hargrove is the first major character to get possessed. He's working as a lifeguard at the community pool when he has a run-in with the mind flayer. The creature drags him to the old steel mill and infects him, turning him into the primary host, the general in charge of recruiting more flayed for the mind flayer's army. What's particularly creepy about Billy's possession is how subtle it is at first. He seems off, sure, more aggressive than usual, which for Billy is saying something. He's got these weird marks on his arm that he hides. He avoids heat and sunlight, seeking out cold, dark places, but he's still functional, still able to play his role as lifeguard and maintain his normal life. That's the key to how the flayed operate. They blend in. They go to work, interact with family, act as normal as possible so no one realizes anything's wrong. Then when the mind flayer calls, they respond. They gather in secret, they follow instructions, and they recruit more victims. Heather Holloway, another lifeguard, gets possessed by Billy. He lures her to the steel mill, and the mind flayer infects her too. Then Heather brings her parents, Tom and Janet Holloway. The infection spreads like a disease, each flayed person bringing more victims into the fold. Mrs. Driscoll, an elderly woman who Nancy interviews for the Hawkins Post, gets infected after eating fertilizer-laced food prepared by the flayed. The mind flayer was using the flayed to consume chemicals, trying to prepare them for the next phase of the plan. Nancy and Jonathan figure out something's wrong when they track Mrs. Driscoll to the hospital. She's acting strange, eating fertilizer despite being supervised, and when they confront her, she attacks, not physically violent, but there's this moment where you can see something else looking out through her eyes. Then the really horrifying part begins. The mind flayer starts melting people down. The flayed receive a psychic command, and their bodies just start liquefying from the inside out, turning into this grotesque slurry of flesh and bone. The mind flayer absorbs this biomass, using it to construct a physical body for itself in the real world. We see this first with rats. Loads of rats get possessed, consume chemicals and fertilizer to make their bodies suitable for the transformation, and then melt down into puddles of organic matter. The mind flayer collects all this material at the steel mill, pooling it together and shaping it into something new. The hospital monster, or the thrall as some people call it, is made from a smaller amount of biomass. Maybe a few bodies, maybe just parts of bodies. It attacks Nancy and Jonathan at Hawkins Memorial Hospital, chasing them through the corridors. The thing is terrifying because it can change shape, squeeze through narrow spaces and reform itself after being damaged. At one point, Nancy slams a door on it, and the creature just melts down, flows under the door like liquid, and reforms on the other side. 11 arrives just in time to stop it, using her powers to rip the thing apart and flush it down into the sewers. But it's not dead, it just returns to the steel mill, adding its mass back to the larger creation. That larger creation is the spider monster. By the time the kids encounter it at the steel mill, the thing is massive, easily 2 or 3 stories tall. It's got this spider-like body plan with multiple legs, a central mass that keeps growing as it absorbs more victims, and absolutely no regard for anything except following the Mind Flayer's commands. The creature is made from dozens of melted people. Billy brings victim after victim to the steel mill. The Mind Flayer possesses them, melts them down, and adds them to the growing biomass. It's body horror at its finest, and honestly, one of the most disturbing visual concepts the show has presented. The spider monster attacks the kids at the steel mill, chasing them through the building and trying to kill 11 specifically. The Mind Flayer wants her dead more than anything else. She's the one who closed the gate, severed its connection, and left it trapped in this weakened state. Later, at Starcourt Mall, the creature makes its final assault. It's even bigger now, having absorbed more victims along the way. The battle is brutal. The creature smashes through walls, hurls cars, and nearly kills everyone before Billy manages to break free of the Mind Flayer's control just long enough to block it. Billy's sacrifice is the turning point. He holds the creature back while Hopper and Joyce close the Russian gate underneath the mall. When that gate closes, severing the Mind Flayer's connection to the Upside Down completely, the spider monster collapses. All that biomass just falls apart into puddles of goo, lifeless without the psychic energy sustaining it. The Flayed showed us that the Upside Down doesn't just create monsters, it corrupts what's already here, repurposes human bodies as raw material for something worse. Now that we've covered all these creatures, it's worth pointing out they're not exactly independent operators. Everything in the Upside Down is connected through what's called a hive mind. It's a shared consciousness where individual creatures act as parts of a larger whole, like cells in a body or ants in a colony. But unlike real-world hive minds, this one has a clear hierarchy with Vecna at the absolute top. Think of it like a pyramid. Vecna is at the peak, the ultimate intelligence controlling everything. Below him is the Mind Flayer, which he shaped and uses as his primary tool for exerting control over the dimension. Below that are the larger creatures like Demogorgons and the Spider Monster. Then you've got the smaller creatures like Demodogs and Demobats. At the bottom are things like the vines and spores, the basic infrastructure of the Upside Down itself. Every single one of these elements is connected. They share information, coordinate their actions, and respond to threats as a unified organism. When Hopper burns a section of vine in the tunnels beneath Hawkins, Will feels it because he's still partially connected to the hive mind. The vines in the Upside Down react. The Demodogs patrolling the tunnels respond to the disturbance. It's all one system. This shared consciousness works through those particles we've talked about, the spores floating around in the Upside Down. They're not just environmental hazards. They're the actual mechanism by which the hive mind communicates and maintains control. Get enough of those particles in your system and you become part of the network, whether you want to or not. Will Byers experiences this firsthand in Season 2. After his time in the Upside Down, he's got residual particles in his body that link him to the Mind Flayer. He can sense when the Mind Flayer is upset or agitated. He feels pain when the tunnels get burned. He knows where the creatures are and what they're planning because he's inadvertently tapped into their communication network. The Mind Flayer can also use this connection to see through Will's eyes, to experience the real world through his perspective. It's a two-way street, which makes Will incredibly vulnerable. Every time he has one of his episodes, he's essentially giving the enemy reconnaissance information about Hawkins and the people trying to stop it. This is why closing the gates is so effective as a strategy. The gates aren't just physical passages between dimensions, they're the primary conduits for the hive mind's psychic energy. Close the gate and you sever the connection, cutting off creatures on one side from the intelligence directing them on the other. We see this most clearly at the end of Season 2. The moment 11 closes the gate at Hawkins' lab, the Demodogs stop attacking. They don't die, they just stop, like someone pulled the plug on their controller. Without the Mind Flayer's active direction, they're basically mindless animals. The hive mind does have strategic advantages. Coordinated attacks become possible. Information gathered by one creature is instantly available to all the others. Vecna can direct multiple assaults simultaneously without needing to physically be present at each location. It's like having a massive army where every soldier is psychically linked to central command. But it also creates vulnerabilities. Hurt one part of the hive mind and the whole network feels it. This is exploited multiple times throughout the series. Burning the tunnels hurts the Mind Flayer. Closing gates weakens Vecna's hold over creatures in the real world. When Billy breaks free of the Mind Flayer's control at Starcourt Mall, it creates confusion in the network that the kids can exploit. There's also the question of individuality within the hive mind. Dart's recognition of Dustin suggests that possessed creatures can retain some memories and personality even under the Mind Flayer's control. It's not total domination. There are cracks, moments where the original consciousness can surface. Billy's final stand proves this too. Despite being fully possessed, despite the Mind Flayer having complete access to his body and mind, Billy finds something inside himself that the Mind Flayer can't quite crush. A memory of his mother, maybe. A spark of who he used to be. Whatever it is, it's enough for him to resist at the critical moment. This suggests the hive mind's control isn't absolute. It requires constant psychic energy to maintain. The stronger the connection to the upside down, the more complete the control. Sever that connection, and individuals can start breaking free. Heat plays a role here too. The Mind Flayer hates heat, which is why the Byers family cranked up the temperature to force the particles out of Will's body. Heat seems to disrupt the hive mind's ability to maintain its hold. Maybe it kills the particles, or maybe it just weakens their psychic connection. Either way, it works. The hive mind also explains some of the stranger interactions we've seen. Why Demogorgons always seem to know where the kids are hiding. Why Demodogs show up in coordinated packs. Why the vines can respond so quickly to disturbances. They're all receiving orders, all working toward the same goal. What's really unsettling is the implication that Vecna has access to the thoughts and memories of everyone in the hive mind. Everyone who's been possessed, everyone who's been flayed, even people who just spent time in the upside down, like Will. He's got access to all of that information, all those perspectives and experiences. It's surveillance on a massive scale. This is probably how Vecna knows so much about Hawkins, despite being trapped in another dimension for decades. He's been watching through Will's eyes, through the possessed rats, through Billy and the flayed. Every victim provides more intelligence, more insight into the world he's trying to destroy. Understanding the hive mind is crucial to understanding how to fight these creatures. It's not enough to kill individual monsters. You have to sever the connection, disrupt the network, cut off the head of the snake. As long as Vecna is alive and connected to the upside down, the threat continues. Since we're on the topic of how these creatures work, it's only fair we talk about how the Hawkins kids managed to survive this long. Fighting monsters from another dimension isn't exactly covered in any school curriculum, so the characters have had to figure things out through trial and error. Some tactics work brilliantly, others get people killed, but over 4 seasons they've developed a pretty solid understanding of what actually hurts these things. Heat and fire are the universal weakness. Everything from the upside down, from the smallest vine to the largest creature, reacts badly to extreme temperatures. This makes sense when you consider that the upside down itself is freezing cold. These creatures evolved or were created in an environment where heat doesn't exist. Introduce fire, and their biology just can't cope. The Byers family uses this against the Mind Flayer in Season 2. They crank up the heaters in their house as high as they'll go, turning the place into a sauna to force the particles out of Will's body. It's painful for Will, absolutely brutal to watch, but it works. The mind flayer can't maintain its hold when the temperature gets that high. Fire works on the vines too. Hopper discovers this in the tunnels beneath Hawkins. When he's trapped and surrounded by the things, he uses his lighter to burn them back. The vines recoil from the flames, giving him just enough space to escape. Later, the kids use this same weakness on a larger scale, setting fire to the entire tunnel system to hurt the mind flayer. Molotov cocktails become a favourite weapon by season 4. Nancy, Steve and Robin use them against Vecna in the Creel house, setting him on fire and buying themselves time to get away. It doesn't kill him, but it definitely hurts him and disrupts his concentration enough that Max can escape his mental trap. Closing gates is another effective strategy, though it requires Eleven's powers to pull off. Every time a gate closes, it severs the connection between dimensions and weakens the creatures trapped on the wrong side. Close the main gate like 11 does at the end of Season 2, and you cut off the Mind Flayer's ability to direct its forces in the real world. The Demodogs just stop. The vines stop moving. Everything connected to the hive mind loses its coordination. The Russian gate under Starcourt Mall is closed the same way in Season 3. Hopper and Joyce destroy the machine, keeping it open, and the moment that connection breaks, the spider monster collapses. Without the psychic energy from the Upside Down sustaining it, the whole thing just falls apart. Eleven's powers are probably the most effective weapon against these creatures. She can throw them around with telekinesis, crush them, rip them apart. She's the one who killed the original Demogorgon, the one who closed multiple gates, and the one who banished Vecna to the Upside Down in the first place. If you had to pick one person to have on your side in a fight against Upside Down creatures, it'd be her. But Eleven's powers aren't unlimited. They drain her physically and mentally, and by Season 3 she loses them entirely for a while after the Mind Flayer wounds her. Even when she has them, they're not a guaranteed win. Vecna proved that. He's got similar powers, possibly stronger, and he nearly killed her in their psychic battles. Music turns out to be unexpectedly effective against Vecna specifically. A person's favourite song, something with deep emotional resonance, can anchor them to reality when Vecna tries to trap them in his mental prison. Max survives her first encounter with Vecna because her friends play Kate Bush at full volume, giving her something to focus on that pulls her back from the brink. This works because Vecna feeds on trauma and negative emotions. He needs his victims isolated, lost in their worst memories. Music disrupts that. It brings up positive associations, reminds people of who they are and what they're fighting for. It's a psychological defense against a psychological attack. Physical weapons have limited effectiveness. Guns can hurt these creatures, but rarely kill them. The Demogorgon in Season 1 gets shot multiple times and just keeps coming. Demodogs are tough enough that you need to hit vital areas to bring them down, and good luck doing that when there's a pack of them charging at you. That said, some physical weapons work better than others. Steve's nail bat becomes iconic for a reason. It's got reach, it's got stopping power, and those nails can tear through flesh pretty effectively. Nancy's sawed-off shotgun at close range can blast chunks out of creatures. Jonathan's axe, Murray's flamethrower, Hopper's sword in Season 4. When you're fighting monsters, improvised weapons often work better than conventional firearms. The kids also get creative with their tactics. They use fireworks against the spider monster, the bright lights and loud noises disorienting it long enough for them to escape. They set traps, create diversions, and use the creature's own hunting instincts against them. When the Demogorgon tracks blood, they use that to lure it where they want it. Psychological warfare works too, at least against Vecna. When Nancy gets trapped in one of his visions, she doesn't just try to escape, she threatens him. She tells him she's seen his past, knows who he really is, and that she's going to expose everything. It rattles him enough that she breaks free. Vecna's got an ego, and that's a weakness you can exploit. The thing is, most conventional approaches don't work. You can't just call the police when a Demogorgon shows up. You can't evacuate the town when gates start opening. The government knows about this stuff and actively covers it up rather than helping. The Hawkins crew has had to become self-sufficient, developing their own tactics and strategies with whatever resources they can scrounge together. Fighting these things takes creativity, bravery, and loads of improvisation. But mostly it takes people willing to stand together and protect each other no matter what. And here are some fun facts and iconic moments I think are interesting enough to share. Let's start with the most memorable scenes because honestly, some of these monster moments are absolutely seared into the collective consciousness of everyone who's watched the show. Max's escape from Vecna while running up that hill plays might be the single most iconic sequence in the entire series. The way it's filmed, with Max running through a hellscape of her own memories, while Kate Bush's synth-driven masterpiece builds in intensity, is just perfect. The moment she breaks through the red smoke and falls back into Lucas's arms, while her friends surround her, has made loads of people cry. It's scary, it's emotional, and it brought a 1985 song back to #1 on music charts in 2022. That's the kind of cultural impact most shows never achieve. Eddie Munson playing Master of Puppets on top of his trailer in the Upside Down is another one. He's shredding Metallica while Demobats swarm around him, buying his friends time to attack Vecna. It's simultaneously the most metal thing ever filmed and one of the most heartbreaking moments in the show. Eddie, the town outcast who everyone blamed for murders he didn't commit, going out as a hero. Dustin sobbing over his body afterwards, telling him he's a hero, that he didn't run this time. I'm not crying, you're crying. Bob Newby's death hit different because Bob was just so genuinely good. He wasn't a fighter, he wasn't prepared for any of this nightmare fuel. He was just a sweet Radio Shack manager who loved Joyce and wanted to help. When the Demodogs catch him in Hawkins' lab, it's brutal and unfair, and exactly the kind of tragedy that makes Stranger Things hit so hard. Sean Astin's performance sold every second of Bob's journey, from lovable nerd to unexpected hero. Barb's death, despite happening early in Season 1, became such a cultural phenomenon that justice for Barb became an actual movement. People were genuinely upset that the show didn't give her death more weight initially, that Nancy moved on too quickly, that Barb was forgotten. The Duffer Brothers had to address it in later seasons, giving Nancy a subplot about survivor's guilt and making sure Barb's parents got closure. It's a testament to how much people connected with a character who had maybe 20 minutes of screen time. The Demogorgon's first full appearance in Season 1, when it corners Nancy in the tree and she falls through to the Upside Down, established the show's horror credentials immediately. That moment where its face opens up like a nightmare flower is still unsettling years later. The sound design alone, that awful clicking scream it makes, is enough to give you chills. Fun fact about the Demogorgon's design, the VFX team studied Venus flytraps extensively to get the petal mouth movement right. They wanted it to feel organic, like an actual predatory plant, not just a CGI monster. The movements were based on real biological mechanisms, which is part of why it feels so viscerally disturbing. Jamie Campbell Bower's transformation into Vecna required something like 7 hours in the makeup chair every day of filming. He's basically unrecognizable under all those prosthetics and practical effects. The Duffer Brothers deliberately went with practical effects over pure CGI because they wanted Vecna to feel tangible and real. The other actors needed to be able to react to an actual person covered in nightmare makeup, not a tennis ball on a stick. Bower did loads of research for the role too. He studied serial killers and their psychology, trying to understand how someone could become so detached from humanity. His physical performance, the way Vecna moves with this unsettling grace despite being monstrous, adds so much to the character. It's not just makeup and CGI. There's a real actor underneath bringing genuine menace to every scene. The spider monster from Season 3 was one of the most technically challenging creatures the show has created. It's this massive thing made of melted human bodies, and the VFX team had to make it look appropriately grotesque while still being something Netflix would allow on screen. They walked a fine line between body horror and outright gore, and honestly, they nailed it. The thing is disturbing in all the right ways. Dart's relationship with Dustin gives us one of the few genuinely tender moments involving an upside-down creature. That scene where Dart recognizes Dustin in the tunnels and lets him pass, even licking Dustin's hand before turning away, proves these creatures aren't just mindless monsters. There's something in there, some capacity for connection and memory. It's tragic because you know Dart is still part of the hive mind, still ultimately a weapon. But for just that moment, the bond they had matters more. The flickering lights became such an iconic warning sign that people started making jokes about checking their light bulbs whenever weird stuff happened. It's such a simple but effective way to build tension. You see a light flickering in someone's house and you immediately know something bad is about to happen. The show uses it consistently throughout all 4 seasons, and it never stops being effective. Will's true sight ability in Season 2, where he can sense the mind flayer and the upside down even when he's in the real world, is based on D&D mechanics. In the game, true sight lets you see through illusions and into other dimensions. The Duffer Brothers, being huge D&D nerds, incorporated loads of game mechanics into how the upside down works. It's not just naming monsters after D&D creatures. The actual rules and logic of the show's supernatural elements are influenced by tabletop role-playing games. Steve's character evolution, from Season 1 jerk to monster-fighting babysitter, is partially reflected in how he fights the creatures. By Season 4, he's the first one charging into danger, taking on demobats with his bare hands, getting strangled and bitten, and just refusing to stay down. Joe Keery apparently did a lot of his own stunts for those scenes, which just adds to how intense they feel. The fake-out deaths have become a bit of a running gag in the fandom. Hopper dies at the end of Season 3, except not really. He's in a Russian prison. Max dies at the end of Season 4, except 11 restarts her heart, though Max is now in a coma. The show loves making you think major characters are gone and then pulling them back at the last second. Whether that's good storytelling or cheap manipulation depends on who you ask, but it definitely keeps people talking between seasons. There are tons of Easter eggs hidden throughout the monster scenes too. The Demogorgons movements in Season 1 were partially inspired by Ridley Scott's Alien. The Mind Flayer's design takes cues from H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror. The body horror elements in Season 3 pay homage to John Carpenter's The Thing. The Duffer Brothers wear their influences proudly, and part of the fun is spotting all the references. These moments, these creatures, they're what make Stranger Things memorable. They're scary, sure, but they're also fascinating, tragic, and sometimes even beautiful in their own twisted way. But the monster story isn't over yet. Season 5 is coming, and there are still so many questions left unanswered. Vecna's current status is probably the biggest uncertainty. He got hurt at the end of Season 4. Badly hurt. Nancy shot him, Steve and Robin hit him with Molotov cocktails, and 11 fought him psychically from across the country, but he didn't die. He fell from the attic of the Creel house and disappeared into the vines below, wounded but very much alive. The 4 gates he created by killing his victims have merged into one massive rift running through Hawkins. It's not just a portal anymore, it's a wound in reality that's actively spreading, with the upside down bleeding into the real world. Parts of Hawkins are now covered in the same ash and spores that fill the alternate dimension. The vines are growing in the real world. The barrier between dimensions is collapsing. Max is in a coma at Hawkins Hospital, her mind trapped somewhere beyond reach. She technically died for a full minute before 11 restarted her heart, and in that minute, Vecna completed his ritual. He got what he needed from her death, even though she survived. Her consciousness is somewhere, maybe trapped in Vecna's mindscape, may be lost in the space between dimensions. Finding her and bringing her back will likely be a major part of Season 5. Will Byers still has his connection to the Upside Down. He can sense when Vecna is active, feel when the Upside Down is close. In the final episode of Season 4, he touches the back of his neck and says Vecna isn't dead, that he can feel him. That connection Will established back in Season 1 has never fully broken, and it's going to be crucial in the final battle. The Mind Flayer's true nature is still not entirely clear. We know Vecna shaped it, uses it as a tool, but was it always just particles waiting to be moulded, or was there something else there first? The Duffer Brothers have this 30-page document explaining the intricacies of the Upside Down, and they've hinted that Season 5 will finally reveal the complete truth about what that dimension actually is and where it came from. There are theories floating around about whether we'll see new creatures in Season 5. The show has introduced new variants every season, from demodogs to demobats to the flesh monsters. It's reasonable to expect something new for the final season, possibly something even more dangerous now that the dimensions are merging. The time jump between Season 4 and 5 also raises questions. The cast is aging, the characters need to be older to make the story work, and the Duffer Brothers have confirmed there will be a significant gap. What's been happening during that time? Has the Upside Down continued spreading? Are more people in Hawkins getting possessed or killed? Has Vecna been recovering and building his strength? Eleven's powers are back, which is crucial. She'll need them for whatever final confrontation is coming. But there's also the question of whether other characters might develop abilities. Will's connection to the Upside Down gives him some level of supernatural awareness. Could that evolve into something more? The government's role in all this is another unresolved thread. Dr. Owens and the Department of Energy have been involved since the beginning, covering up incidents and trying to contain the threat. Season 5 will probably see them taking a more active role, possibly with military intervention, now that the gates are visible and undeniable. Whatever happens, it's going to be massive. The Duffer Brothers have promised the final season will be epic in scale, bringing together all the threads from previous seasons into one conclusive battle. Vecna's not done with Hawkins, and Hawkins definitely isn't done with him, and that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's video. In a future one, I'm definitely going to cover other topics like Hawkins' lab experiments, the characters' backstories, the Dungeons and Dragons connections, the 1980s references, just so much stuff that I didn't have the time to cover for this video. But until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.